Hey, it's Brayden, and I'm joined by Brendan.
How's it going, guys?
This is
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me you built a time machine? My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. No, just do something. Go. Sleep. First.
Absolutely.
Gobsmack.
how are you doing today, Brendan?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing today, Brayden?
I'm good. I'm good. It's too bad Logan couldn't join us.
Hmm. He's
No
in a better
internet right
place.
now. No internet right now. He's stuck in his RV, in between moves. You know how that goes. But
Oh yeah.
I'm glad you could join us.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's been a while since we got to talk last time.
Yeah. So just real quick, we were on an episode of yours a while back talking about The Martian. Talk
Mhm.
Ag to Me. You want to go ahead and tell people, what your podcast is about?
Sure thing. So yeah, like Brayden said, I run a podcast called Talk Ag to Me, and essentially the idea behind it is bringing on people that don't have very much experience in the ag industry and teaching them all about where their food comes from, the different methods of growing it, some of the technology and science involved in that kind of stuff, and trying to relate agriculture and farming to more mainstream topics like movies, video games, TV shows, that kind of stuff. And so yeah, I had Brayden and Logan on my show, and we talked about The Martian and all of the accuracies and inaccuracies related to the farming in that movie. And I think it was a pretty good episode. I got a lot of good reviews on it.
Really, I didn't know about the reviews,
Oh
but
yeah, no.
that's what we're gonna do today. Okay, we're gonna do a movie, you and I. One of my favorite animated movies of all time. There's just something about it that really warms my heart, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah,
And
oh, definitely.
we're we're gonna talk about Up, the movie Up,
Mm.
Disney Pixar movie Up. Now, my first question for you, Brendan, is when's the first time that you saw Up?
Oh man, I was little. When did Up come out? It was like early, like 2008 or something like that.
2009, I think,
2009.
according to this. Yeah.
I think I saw it in theaters the first time it came out. And so that was probably my first experience. So it's been a while. But I've watched it, hundreds of times. My sister and I loved that movie growing up, so we watched it all the time. My girlfriend loves it, so we watch it all the time over when she's here. And so yeah, I'm very familiar with it. It's definitely one of my favorite animated movies as well.
Yeah, it's good. I saw it in the dollar theaters.
Oh,
When
nice.
you know how the movies go from before they come out on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, or a video
Oh
on
yeah.
demand. They go to the dollar theaters. That's
Hmm.
when I first saw it. I didn't really have any interest in seeing it. I guess as a young kid, sometimes you don't know what you want to see.
Right.
But yeah, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, it was pretty good. It actually took me a few viewings to really appreciate the
Hmm.
movie that it is. So we're gonna get into it here. The first thing I do want to talk about is the music. I think
Hmm.
that's one thing that I feel really stands out with this movie.
Hmm.
It actually won an Academy Award for Best Original Score, especially with
Wow.
the theme of the. It's called Married Life. You know the
Hmm.
montage at the beginning of the movie where Carl and Ellie kind of get married and they kind of grow up together.
Yeah.
Um,
Da-da-da-da,
yeah,
da-da-da-da. Oh yeah, I know Married Life.
yeah. So that's kind of one of the probably, especially in recent memories, one of the most famous themes or love themes
Hmm.
of I think the 21st century, and that kind of theme throughout the movie is really what stands out to me and is kind of tugs at your emotional heartstrings. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And music is one of the things that really made this movie for me. I mean, the jokes and the story and all that kind of stuff is great, but the music is just so memorable, and it really drives the story really well. Like you mentioned in that opening montage where Married Life starts, um, the shift in the tone from they start off all happy and everything's great, and then obviously the shift in the emotional basically their emotional roller coaster we go through of that opening scene. There's a shift in the music as well. Married Life goes from very happy and cheery to now it's more kind
Right.
of sad and slow. And yeah, I think the music makes this movie perfectly well. It's almost like reminds me of like a John Williams style
Yeah.
composition, and I'm a big fan of John Williams, and so I love the Up soundtrack. I listen to it pretty frequently.
And I think Michael Giacchino's the composer of this. It kind of shot him
Mm.
up into superstardom. He got started doing Lost, the TV show,
Oh wow.
and then he did animated movies. So he did The Incredibles, he did Ratatouille. So he had already done a few Disney Pixar movies, and then 2009 was a big year for him because he did Star Trek, the
Mhm.
movie with J.J. Abrams,
Mhm.
which he knew J.J. Abrams because J.J. Abrams produced Lost, so they already
Right.
had a relationship there. And then, of course, Up, and he wins an Oscar, and now he's one of the most well-known composers of all time. He does, the Spider-Man Homecoming, that whole series, and yeah, Jurassic World. He does those movies now. He's going to be doing the upcoming Batman score. So now he's like a powerhouse composer. But
Yeah,
I
it
think,
sounds like it.
Up was really a turning point for him that year,
Yeah.
2009.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like he's a big contender now. I didn't realize he did like Incredibles and Ratatouille and all. Like those are other, when I think of like great animated movie soundtracks, those are kind of the movies that come to mind. Incredibles has a fantastic soundtrack. I love the music in Incredibles, and Ratatouille is like it sets the tone so perfectly for how that movie's supposed to be interpreted, and it's like kills it. So I didn't realize he did those two. That makes a lot of sense as to why Up was so popular.
Yeah, and then he does a similar thing when I think his next animated movie, if I'm not mistaken, he does Inside Out, which kind of has a similar tone as far as like sentimentality.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So obviously he's a Pixar powerhouse, and now he's just one of the world's greatest composers, in my opinion. So really cool to see him grow. See what he's become now, and I'm glad but I still think Up is his best, in my opinion. I think it's his best work. So I kind of want to move on here, to kind of go through the movie a little bit. Not too many details. We already talked about the montage and the sad parts, and really touching, and kind of the one of the things that I think surprised me when I first saw it was I wasn't expecting that like hit emotionally when his wife passes away. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, it hits it like a truck.
Yeah, it's a bummer. It's a bummer.
Uh-huh.
Another thing I appreciate about this movie that I think I appreciate about any movie that tries to involve this is it kind of has like a vintage feel. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah,
Because
definitely. And I'm kind of an old fashioned, I'm an old soul. I love like old fashioned music and like vintage, style stuff. Like I just something about that like 50s style or 40s style aesthetic is just really pleasing to me. And so that movie, like, the entire beginning part of that movie is just very, very, it just satisfies the old soul in me.
yeah, and it's funny because it's almost like there's like a nostalgic feeling to it, even though
Hmm.
both you and I, obviously weren't around during that time period, but it
Right.
almost feels like those times were more simple. They were simpler times, or more, and
Hmm.
obviously there was different things going on around politically, but I just feel like the whole atmosphere of like 50s and 60s was just more of like a chill, American dream kind of lifestyle. Obviously, it's not, if you actually lived during that time period, it wasn't necessarily like that. But, it just gives me that nostalgic feel, where it's like, man, I wish I was kind of around during that time where I could just go to the pharmacy and get like a milkshake and a 5 cent soda.
Yeah, no, it really, and I think part of that too is in the movie. We're seeing them through the perspective of them being kids. They get to play around in this abandoned house, and you
Right.
get to see them pretend to be flying a plane, and they like idolize this great adventurer Charles Muntz, and like it kind of reminds you of how much fun it was to do that kind of stuff as a kid, to go play around in the neighborhood, and actually like a lot of that kind of stuff isn't really happening a whole lot anymore. Like kids aren't allowed to go into abandoned houses and play around. Kids aren't allowed to like go and do some of the stuff that these kids got to do. And so there's just something about that, like that free spirit kind of energy that gets put into that part of the movie that I think is just really, really fun and cool. And like you said, there's like a certain level of nostalgia there that shouldn't be, because we haven't experienced that, but it's still cool and still fun to experience.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny because this movie is one of the first movies we're going to cover on our channel that is from the 21st century. But it feels so classic. It has a classic feel to it, anyways. And it's such a classic already.
Right. It's one of those, like, I feel like there's a few animated movies that are like that, that are like early 2000s. Like Cars was
Hmm.
kind of like that for me too,
Right.
where they're just like, yes, they're new generation animated movies, but they're still classic. They're still like, you somebody says, "Hey, you want to watch Up?" and you're like, "Yes, I do actually." Like, it's not, it's not Frozen, it's not Moana. It's,
Yeah.
it's just feels right. And not that those movies are not like that. I like those
Right.
movies too, but just there's something about watching those old, for us, old movies like Up
Yeah.
and Cars that are just so fun.
Exactly. No, I agree 100% with you. So now that we kind of have the feel of the movie, the music, the mood, the tone, and we know, the beginning's this montage where he meets his wife as a child and they grow up together, they get married, and then they get old. They grow old, and unfortunately, she passes away. And basically, we're starting here where now he's kind of at a crossroads here where he has to there's an incident and he is almost forced to move into like a nursing home or a home for elderly people.
Mm.
So then he meets this young boy, um,
Love Russell.
Russell. Yeah, who is? Would you say is he a Boy Scout?
Yeah, he's some kind of Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, some kind
Right.
of, I don't know what they call it in the movie, but yeah, essentially like that.
Okay, I have no experience with that whatsoever. Do you have any experience as far as like Boy Scouts or Eagle Scouts, anything like that?
I wish I did. I had friends that did it when I was growing up. I never got into it, so I have no idea how any of that works.
Okay, yeah, me neither. But anyways, I guess his point in visiting the old man is he needs to earn a badge by helping out an elderly person. And
Mm.
so this old man basically brushes him off and he has a plan to leave so that with the house, that way he can get to the destination. Now, I kind of wanted to ask you so you can let your turn to let the audience kind of know what the point is in him leaving and why he wants to go to this certain destination.
hmm So we learn through the opening montage that him and his wife had this dream of going to Paradise Falls. It was supposed to be some magical location lost in time that didn't exist supposedly, and it was I think that was the location where their childhood hero Charles Munns was trying to find
Right.
this mythical bird, and so he basically, after his wife passes, he decides that he's got really nothing left to live for. He's going to try to carry out their dream and try to make it there. And so that's kind of his plus, like you mentioned, he's kind of being backed into a corner right now because he's being forced into some kind of retirement home. His house is trying to be bulldozed by companies that are trying to build large corporation based businesses, and he's
Hmm.
really, he's up against a wall without anything to do. So he's basically just saying, you know what, this was our original plan from day one. She may not be here, but I'm going to finish what we started.
Yep. So he decides to leave. And how does he leave?
So, the namesake of the movie, Up, he decides to tie a ton of balloons because he used to sell balloons at the zoo that him and his wife worked at. He just collected balloons over the years and tied a ton of balloons to his house, and that lifted his house off the ground and flew him all the way to South America.
Yeah, and that's kind of the iconic, I guess you could say scene
Hmm.
or picture when you think of Up, it's that house with all those balloons.
Right.
Now, the animators attached, and I have an exact number here. They animated the house to have 10,297 balloons. So a little over 10,000 balloons.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, the science behind that, how realistic?
So I actually, are you familiar with the Film Theory channel?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so there's a YouTube channel called Film Theory, and they're made by the same people who made Game Theory. And I don't know if you've watched Game Theory at all.
No.
Essentially, they break down and analyze movies like this, and they go over like the science and the realistic portions of, like, I actually used them as part of my research for our Martian episode too. Like, they gave an analysis of how accurate it would be to survive off of potatoes, and so
Right.
So they did one. It's funny you asked me to do Up for this episode because they literally did one like a day before you asked me that. And when you said that, I was like, oh, perfect. There's a video I can watch for this. And so I watched the video, and basically their assessment was that having that few balloons, no, it wouldn't be possible. Having balloons at all, it would be possible to move the house, but it would take like 30 million balloons for it to be possible.
Yeah. So the team over at Screen Rant, they calculated it would take about 26.5 million. So somewhere in that range.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Somewhere in that range where it has to be millions of. That's a lot of balloons, though. Like
That is.
I don't
So
think that's worth it.
one of the things that Film Theory went over, which I'd heard about this, but I didn't really know all the details of it. Apparently, I think it was in Times Square, maybe, they did some massive like Guinness Book of World Records event where they released 1 million balloons or 1.5 million balloons. And it was supposed to be like, the record to try to get as many balloons in the air as possible. And there were so many balloons that it covered an entire building. And he would need like 20 times that number of balloons, and there's no way you could connect into to a house that small. It would cover the entire sun, that many balloons. Not only in terms of physics, but also like how would you afford that many balloons? How would you
Right.
how would you save it? Because we see in the movie they're not very rich people. Like they constantly have to break the bank to try to repair their car and fix their
Right.
house. And so like how would they afford to be able to get all of those balloons unless he was stealing balloons from work or something. But I don't think that our old Mr. Fredrickson was a thief. But yeah, we kind of we suspend that we suspend that reality just to enjoy the movie. But if you think about it, there's a lot wrong with that equation there.
Yeah. Now I have a question for you, just to kind of add some realism to it. What if they added a little tiny storyline, maybe even into the montage, where he works at some kind of balloon factory where they create the balloons, and he was able to take a few home throughout the years? How do you think that would affect the film at all?
I think that it would benefit the story, because I think that's a big question that everyone asks is how in the did he get this many balloons? Like they're just so many balloons that he just randomly has, and like how did he find the time to tie them all to his roof? How did he get them under that sheet so nobody could see them? There's a lot of plot holes in terms of how he got to that point, and because he's able to control how high or how low he is based off of the balloons. Like he cuts balloons free during the movie to try to get the house lower, and he's able to control the house as if it's a plane. So how did he know exactly how many balloons he was going to need and how to control that? And
Yeah.
I think that if there was some kind of like a mini piece of the montage where it showed him getting the balloons, or like maybe he sneaks a few home in his pocket every day after work or whatever, I think that might. I don't know that it would completely justify it, but I think that it might kind of help people understand and believe that situation a little bit more.
Yeah. Another thing, and you mentioned it kind of a little bit, but it seems like he kind of kept this under wraps, kind of secret, obviously.
Yeah.
So not only would he have a place to store it, but he would actually have to inflate all of these balloons himself, right?
Right.
And according to this article, if he were to actually realistically get 26.5 million balloons, like let's say someone wanted to do this in real life, it would actually take someone, let's say it takes about 9 seconds to inflate and tie a helium balloon, okay? It would take someone approximately 7 years without stopping to eat or sleep to inflate that many balloons.
Oh yeah, no. I heard something similar that said that if it takes about 10 seconds to do a balloon, that it would take 10 years for him to be able to do that, and there's just no way, Like he's an old man. He doesn't have time for all that.
So I'm wonder they don't even explain how he inflated those balloons. It's just like all of a sudden they appeared.
Right. And if he was inflating them that whole time, you would think that by the time he gets enough balloons, that there'd be some that are deflating already.
Right. Exactly. So I don't know. They never explain it. Maybe because you can't really. But
yeah, it's the Pixar effect of like, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous, but it's a kids movie. Just enjoy it.
Exactly. I think it's just a movie for everyone, not just kids. So just like
I agree.
it's a masterpiece. Enjoy it for what it is. Don't question it.
Exactly. Right.
Another thing that I thought was kind of, I'm curious about is how dangerous that they go into a thunderstorm while they're flying that. How dangerous would that be? I mean, would it realistically all the balloons pop, or do you know anything about how that would work?
I tried doing some research on the cumulonimbus is what storm they flew
Hmm.
into, and from what I can tell, I mean it would be. I'm not sure that it would completely destroy all of the balloons or the house or cause that much damage. I think that they did get lucky to get out of it alive. I think that it would definitely cause more damage than it did. But I don't know. It's hard to say. Like it would depend on a lot of different things. It depend on like what angle they're going at it. Like because they might have just sideswiped it. Maybe they didn't go into the entire storm. Like we don't
Yeah.
really know how into it they were. It looks like they were really into it, but they also passed out and woke up and they were in South America. And so it's difficult to say how much of that damage is accurate. But cumulonimbus is one of the more destructive storm types, and so it's probably safe to say that in a real life situation that house probably would have fallen to the ground if it hit that storm.
Yeah. Do you think they would have been able to make it all the way to South America? Let's say they had enough balloons.
If they had enough balloons and they can make it fit, and and the physics was fine and everything, I think that maybe. But another thing that film theory was explaining, I actually saw this in a couple articles as well. In order for them to fly that way, because they don't have very much control over their situation, like they have like shower curtains out the windows, but really, how much is that going to save them?
Right.
In order for them to be able to make it to South America, they have to catch a certain air current. And so to catch that current and to not be thrown off of that track would be like the amount of luck they would need would be so incredible. Realistically, I think no, I don't think they would make it. But I think that if everything went right, I think that they could make it without the house being destroyed. If that's kind of the alternative.
Right, right. Do you know how long it would take? I mean, they got there rather quickly. I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
I don't know. I don't like. I haven't seen anything that went over how long that trip would actually take. I know that there's been some people who have tried stuff like that. Like they've tried flying, boxes, or they tried flying themselves, or you know, I think it was David Blaine, one of the famous magicians. I think it was David Blaine. He tried flying himself with just with balloons, like with no other help, just with weather balloons. I don't remember how far he went, but he went like really really far, and I don't remember how long it took off the top of my head. I can imagine it would take longer than it did in the movie, but we also don't know how long he was knocked out.
well, I don't know. That seems like it just seems like they basically went through a storm and they were there.
Yeah, no, I think that there's definitely a lot of unrealistic time lapsing in that area. I definitely don't think it would be that quick, but I don't know how long it would actually take if this is assuming that everything went right. Like if everything went right, I would say it'd probably take at least I don't know a week, maybe a few, at least a few days, like because it seemed like for them it was overnight.
Right. Now that we're talking about them and being in the air, just to really, I want to do a fun fact real quick. When they first announced the movie Up, they kind of just released the title, and they didn't really say much about. It was one of those mysteries where you didn't really know what it was about
Mm-hmm.
until they released the first trailer. So an early draft of the script for Up was actually going to be about a war between residents of a floating city and land dwelling communities.
Huh.
So the protagonists, it would not have been a little boy and an old man. They would have been two brothers who had to put their differences aside when they fall to the ground and discover a magical bird.
Wow.
So that's kind of where it starts.
Huh.
Where they started the idea of Up. And then it evolved into this masterpiece.
That's insane. How far it's come.
But would you see a movie like that? I think
Oh,
that.
absolutely. That sounds amazing. A sky city versus a land city, and like it's basically a civil war, but there's a magic bird involved. Like that.
Yeah,
That
so
sounds
two guys that are used to just two brothers that are like grew up, were raised in the air, fall to the end up on land,
huh.
and they have to like survive, I guess.
That sounds really really cool. I want to see because it sounds like almost like a Treasure Planet kind of style movie. But yeah, no, that sounds like a really. I would definitely watch that if that was what up to ended up being. I'm happy with what
I,
we got, but I
right.
want to see what that movie would have turned out to be.
I think I would have kept it, honestly. I mean, maybe they can make another movie like that, but
Yes,
I like
call
the
it
way
down.
I like the way it ended up. So
Yeah.
they end up in Paradise Falls. And I wanted to ask you, I didn't ask you to do research on this at all or anything like that. But is there an area in real life that's kind of similar to what where they ended up that kind of looks like that?
Yeah, so Paradise Falls is actually based off of a place in South America called Angel Falls. It's the world's tallest waterfall.
Oh wow. I didn't know that. It
Hmm.
looks like it's in Venezuela.
It is.
Could they realistically survive in a place like that together?
I mean, looking at the environment, I would say probably not, unless they were really, really good about gathering their food. But it's a tropical area, so there's a lot of things that are out to kill them.
Including big birds, I guess.
Yes.
And I do not see a Walmart in sight. So
No, I think that they might be a little bit in trouble if it comes to food situation. They might need to take a page from Matt Damon's character and figure out how to grow potatoes.
yeah, yeah. Grow potatoes in Venezuela.
Right.
So I like the kind of the dynamic that the old man, the kid have. He kind of obviously starts to get a soft spot for this young boy, um, and it kind of alludes to the fact that he's got maybe a stepmom that his parents are divorced.
Hmm.
I don't know if you caught that at all, but
Yeah,
basically
that's
he
kind of the
mentioned,
impression I got.
yeah. So this is the first time a Disney movie's alluded to divorce actually.
Oh, really?
Before, yeah.
Huh.
So there's a lot of single parents
Hmm.
in Disney. There are, but as far as alluding to that, the fact that there is divorce instead of like a death, one of the parents dying. This is the first time,
Wow.
which is interesting. Yeah,
That's
and
yeah.
it reminds me of Toy Story. Andy's dad's not there, but you don't know if they got divorced or if he died. They don't really
Right.
go into it at all.
Yeah. That's how a lot of there's like the orphan syndrome or whatever with like a lot of superhero
Hmm.
stories. Like they have one parent or no parents, and nobody ever explains what happens. I mean, some of them die, but like you don't
Hmm.
really ever hear about like divorce happening because that's not really a topic people want to talk about.
Yeah. So Charles Muntz.
Mhm.
I want to talk about him for a second. The antagonist, I guess, of the movie. One of the prime examples of don't meet your heroes.
Yep.
What do you think about his whole backstory? Is there anything that can relate to real life that, his career? I
Um,
mean,
I think that as a character, he was based off of Howard Hughes, if I'm not mistaken.
okay. Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but he always just kind of gave me Howard Hughes vibes. So I
Right.
think that he's based off Howard Hughes, but I could be wrong. I'll have to look that up. But I think that as a character, I was always split on him because when I first started watching the movie, like when I was little, I used to just despise him. I thought he was the worst guy. As I've gotten older and I started to really watch the movie, like if you think about it, this guy's life was kind of ruined for no reason. Like he found this bird, he did this incredible zoological study, brings it back, and nobody believes him. And like the scientists all basically like faked their research to say that it wasn't a real bird, that he used dinosaur bones or whatever. And so, to be fair, like to this guy's point, he kind of was. He was kind of screwed over, and I kind of feel bad for him. I think that there's a certain level of balance that needs to be had that, I love Kevin as a character. I think that Kevin's relationship with Mr. Fredrickson and with Russell is just so hilarious. So
Yeah.
I don't think that Russell and what's his first name? Is it Carl? I think that I don't think that they were wrong for trying to protect Kevin from Charles Muntz, but I also think that Charles Muntz he kind of deserved a break. I don't think that he was completely justified in the way that he was in the way that he was finished off. But I don't know. I go back and forth in that character all the time because, like I said, he was kind of he was kind of screwed over, but at the same time, he was kind of a bad guy.
Right, right. Yeah, it's like he was screwed over, but then like what came about because of it, he
Hmm.
became he was obsessed with finding this bird and that's like the only thing that mattered to him. That was like number one now, you know.
Right.
And I don't know if you knew this, but that wasn't, you know, he had different character arcs that they had ideas for. For example, they had one where during his obsessive search, he's led into a maze where he gets lost and dies. I don't know how they would have worked that into the story, but that was kind of what they were going to have. Now, another thing that they were actually going to do is he was going to just work out his differences with Carl using words, like just like talking it out. But they thought that was too boring, so they added the action scenes.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it makes it a better movie. You know,
Mm.
puts you on the edge of your seat a little bit. I do want to talk about Kevin real quick. He has this device. I don't know. Was it created by Charles Muntz, where he's able to? It's like a translator, right? A translator collar.
Yeah, I think that is led to believe that Charles Muntz did create those.
Okay, how realistic is that? Are we close to finding something like that?
Not that I have seen. Essentially, what I can picture that does is it translates brainwaves into vocal patterns, but
Right.
because it's it's not consistent with their barking. They don't bark to speak in the movie. Like there are times that Doug speaks without opening his mouth, and so I think that it's more closely related to like a neurological scanner, and it scans brain waves and interprets them into vocalized thought, essentially, which is something that's being theorized. But as far as I can tell, there hasn't been any big time strides towards technological advancement towards that. It's something that people want to do. It's something that's been discussed in the science realm for forever. It's just not something I think we're getting close to yet.
Do you think it's ever going to be possible? Because I feel like there's just such a big difference between the waves of an animal and like the English language. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I think that there's definitely going to be, if it ever is possible, I think it's going to be a while, just because we know so little about how the brain works, and we can't really figure out how brainwaves are interpreted into speech, anyways. Brainwaves are kind of a complicated thing because they're supposed to be a form of language themselves, but we can't really, like, brainwaves don't directly translate into English language, and like you said, animals have their own language. They have their own level of communication, but it's not the same as human language. Like dogs can talk to dogs, but dogs have a hard time talking to whales, and because they speak different languages. And obviously, we can't talk to certain animals because we don't speak their language and they don't speak ours. That we can understand intention. Like animals all have this inborn ability to understand. What a certain animal is going to do, but not necessarily what they're thinking in terms of words. Like we
Right.
can't talk to dogs, but we can tell what dogs are thinking just off of how they're acting. And so because of that, I think that the communicational barrier is going to be really, really difficult to cross because we don't even know how brainwaves work in humans. How are we going to tell how brainwaves work in animals? And if we can't figure out how, we usually go to animals first, but if we can't figure out how the communication works on our level, we're not going to be able to translate animals into that because we don't even know how it works for us yet. And so it's difficult to say. I would like to see it work eventually because I think it'd be really interesting technology, but I don't think it's coming anytime soon.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yeah, I just don't see how it would even be possible, honestly. Just maybe a variation of that where you can kind of, not like a translator, but where you can kind of figure out what the dog wants or thinks. They kind of already have that. I don't know if you've seen videos where the owner, she'll like create different buttons with different like what they want, basically wants. Like one button means they want food, another button means they want to go outside or they want to go to the walk or they want to
Oh
go to the
yeah, I've
park,
seen those.
or one just means no. And they kind of raise the dog up from infancy to basically teach them or train them what those mean and what they'll get from pressing each different button. And so it's almost like a way to communicate with these dogs and
Mm-hmm.
understand what they want instead of them just barking, you know?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot more advanced than anything we've seen before. And I've seen those videos and I was really, really fascinated by them. A lot of people think that it's just like that the dogs understand how to talk to us. And in a way it is, but it's kind of like a Pavlovian effect. If you press this button, you'll get this result.
Right.
But if you think about it, that's how our communication works too. If you say this thing, you'll get this result more than likely. So it's easy to kind of make the argument that they're not really doing anything special in terms of like they don't understand they're communicating to us. They're just pressing a button and because they know what's going to happen. But that's all we're doing when we're communicating anyway. We're saying something that we want someone else to react to, and we know what the reaction is going to be. That's why we say it. And so I think that that's a valid form of communication between animals and humans that we've never been able to figure out before. So anyone who's able to figure that out, I commend them on that level of creativity.
Right. Yeah. The fact that it's even possible is pretty amazing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And dogs are so incredibly smart. Like we have no idea how smart dogs are. Like we're
Yeah.
still figuring out stuff that they're able to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Every dog's different too. And I really
Right.
appreciate how even, dogs and cats, they'll have different personalities and different personality traits. And
Oh
it's just
yeah.
so
No,
cool to see,
100%. Mm-hmm.
you know. So,
So before we move on, I actually did want to bring up. I looked it
sure.
up. What who Charles Muntz was based off of. There's no concrete evidence, but there's theories that he's actually based off of a guy named Charles Mintz. And Charles Mintz used to work for Disney, and I guess him and Walt Disney had some kind of falling out, and so they made Charles Muntz based off of him.
Okay, I know who Charles Mintz is, if I'm not mistaken. They both created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which is kind of their first cartoon.
Yes.
There was some kind of falling out between them. Well, do you know anything about kind of his backstory at all? Were you able to look that up at all?
I was trying to read it, and I couldn't find a whole lot that really explained what the falling out was about. I did read that he helped create Oswald, and that he was. I think that there was some kind of dispute over, like you mentioned, kind of like something with credit. He wasn't getting the credit that he deserved for his
Yeah.
projects or something like that. I don't know how much of that tied into the overall dispute that resulted in their. Because I think that they ended up like stop being friends and they stopped working together because of this whole dispute. Um, but I don't know what caused it. I couldn't find that.
Yeah. It looks like he lost rights to Oswald the
Mm,
Rabbit, which he helped create. I think that's really the big thing. And Oswald eventually, I mean, it was the start of something big. Of course,
right.
Walt ended up creating like Mickey and, other characters. But that was kind of the beginning there, was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And I think people just kind of forget about who helped create Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Charles Mintz. But I guess he's kind of made out as a bad guy, maybe? Kind
So
of
I think that the
bitter?
idea behind making him, like by making Charles Muntz based off of him, like we were just discussing with Charles Muntz, he's not a bad guy. He wasn't given credit for what he earned, and then because of that, he kind of went crazy. So I think like kind of a similar situation might have happened. Like maybe Charles Mintz wasn't a bad guy, but because of this dispute, he was kind of seen as negative, and he just like got more and more angry over it, and maybe that's what caused their whole falling. I don't know.
You are a bad guy, but this does not mean you're a bad guy.
Yeah. So Walt does give him a little credit in an interview. He mentioned that Mintz actually kind of helped Walt in creating standards for high quality cartoons.
Hmm.
And so Walt kind of took that, it kind of rubbed off on Walt. And even after Mintz left, he kind of took that on. And so I think Mintz does deserve a lot of credit for what Disney is. He died relatively young, shortly after all of this in 1939 from a heart attack. So, I think he kind of just gets forgotten.
Yeah,
So that's too bad.
yeah. Go give your daily shout out to Charles Mintz for all the
Yes.
great work.
Yes. Remember him. So, yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. I thought that was funny, just that sometimes they'll model bad guys in movies after people that they don't like. We kind of talked
Oh
about it
yeah.
in the Robin Williams episode, but
Well,
yeah.
didn't you guys do an episode on Shrek where you talked about that too? Lord Farquaad being based off of
Yeah,
some.
so yeah, that's what I was referring to is
Oh yeah,
um
yeah.
yeah, DreamWorks, modeled Lord Farquaad after someone real,
Mm-hmm.
and the from Disney, cuz Katzenberg and Spielberg and others formed DreamWorks. They created DreamWorks, and Katzenberg used to be a Disney animated the head for the animated movies division, basically, and he left. But there was like a falling out between him and the head of Disney,
Hmm.
and that's kind of why he ended up leaving. They didn't renew his contract, so he modeled Lord Farquaad after the Disney head. So, and the he doesn't actually say it, but the actual resemblance is uncanny.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I didn't know that until I listened to your episode. I was like, huh, that's it's really messed up, but that's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's crazy. So, but is there anything else about the movie that you want to talk about or you appreciate that hasn't been mentioned yet?
I mean, it's kind of a a superficial thing, but just a lot of like the humor in the movie is just
Yeah.
super on par. I mean, like it's just it goes over the heads of kids and it's hilarious for people who are watching it. It's a great Up is a great movie to rewatch. Like watching a little is fun because you have all the dogs and you have like the funny jokes and you have the bird and there's all that dynamic. When you go back and watch it when you're older, it's so much funnier because you're able to appreciate Carl a lot more and Russell annoys you a lot more. And like all the dogs are just like your perspective just changes so much on that movie as you get older. It's just really really fun. And so like that's a movie that is dynamic in its interpretation. And what I mean by that is just that it's like you have some movies that you can rewatch and yeah, they're fine, but there are very few movies that are fun to watch as a kid, but as you grow old with them, they almost like age with you.
Mm-hmm.
Shrek has that same effect. You like it's fun to watch as a kid, but as you get older, there's a lot more things you understand and it's a lot funnier.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So that I think that Up is because like on top of the humor, just the emotional parts of it too. Like we understand the pain of Carl a lot more when he loses his wife. We understand how frustrated Charles Munsell was when he had his reputation destroyed because of this false allegation. We understand the pain that Russell goes through when he talks about his parents and nobody being there for him. Like we understand like the emotional parts of the movie just as much as we understand the the more humorous parts that we wouldn't have understood when we were kids. So I think it's just that Up in my opinion is a very underrated movie. Like I know a lot of people that love Up, but Up is not one of those movies that gets heavily like acclaimed as being like such a great Disney movie, and it is. It's got or not Disney, yeah, Disney.
Pixar?
Pixar.
Yeah.
Pixar was what I was looking for, but it's still Disney.
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a great movie that gets completely. I don't think it gets thrown under the bus, but I think it deserves a lot more attention than it gets.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a little fun fact here. I don't know if you knew this, but there's only 3 animated movies in the history of movie history that have ever been nominated for Best Picture, and Up
Really?
is one of them. Yeah. So I
Wow.
don't know if you remember what the first one is. The first one, which was completely unheard of at the time, was Beauty and the Beast. That was
Huh.
the first animated movie ever to be nominated for Best Picture. Up became the second one. They expanded the list to 10 that year, so that's kind of part of the reason why they're trying to figure out that format. But it was Up, and then the following year, Toy Story 3. So those are the
Oh.
only 3. And I want to say this: one of the reasons they expanded the Best Picture nominee list was because the year before, people were up in arms, basically, at the fact that Wally was not nominated for Best Picture.
See, and I am behind that because I love Wally, and I think it's greatly underappreciated.
So, partly because of Wally, did they increase the Best Picture nomination list, and you
Wow.
can Up and Toy Story 3 can thank Wally for
Huh.
being nominated. It was almost like a makeup nomination, although I do think that they deserve it. Um, you don't see that anymore, really. Animated movies getting nominated for Best Picture, so I,
Yeah.
I,
No,
I
that's
think it was kind of because of the times.
yeah. No, that's really amazing that it was basically making movie history by being one of the only
Hmm.
animated movies to get that kind of nomination. It didn't win, did it?
No, no movie, no animated movie has one. No
Okay.
animated movie has one. So it's hard because it's animated. Like they have their own category for best animated movie already. So it's just one of those things where it's going to be tough to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, same thing with sports. It's hard for a pitcher to win MVP when he has his own award for the
Sure.
Cy Young. So that's kind of the same logic there.
Yeah, no,
But
that's logical.
but anything else before we close it out?
I mean, I can't think of anything. I mean, I just like to say, thanks for having me on. It's always fun talking about movies that I grew up with.
Yeah.
Up has been one of my favorite movies for a really long time. Since like I said, since it came out, my sister and I have just loved it. We quoted it every chance we get. It's just such a great movie because it has so much depth to it that it's easily enjoyable by kids, but it's something that adults can watch it and still appreciate it as a movie because it's still got that emotional component. It's still funny. It's still, charming. It's just a really, really all around fun movie. And so, yeah, I was, when you asked me to come on the episode, the two movies that I wanted to talk about most were Wall-E and Up. And so I'm kind of glad that I got to talk about both of them a little bit.
Yeah. The reason why you recommended you recommended Wally, and I said let's do Up. I have nothing against Wally. I think it's a great movie. Believe me, I do. Um, it's just that it doesn't have the same feeling for me, the nostalgia feeling.
Mhm.
For some reason, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't touch me the way that Up does, or like Toy Story, or even Ratatouille. I'll still watch Ollie. It's Ollie Wally. It's a great movie. It really is. It's just I don't know. I'm not as passionate about it as I should say.
That's fair. And I personally love Wall-E, but I can definitely understand that. It's kind of one of those, it's not a forgotten movie, but it's kind of like when you think of nostalgic movies, Wall-E's not the first one
Mhm.
that comes to mind for everybody. And that's,
Right.
perfectly understandable. And Up is a very, very deep movie, and it's a movie that connects with a lot of people. And so I can definitely understand that one being more appealing to, to talk about in depth. But no, I definitely wasn't upset to replace Wall-E with Up in our conversation.
But I'd be more than open to do it definitely another time. I'm not going to shut down the idea, okay? Um,
Yeah.
so, first of all, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to do it. I know you're a busy man and you have a lot of other shows to be on. But I'm going to give you this opportunity again to let people know about your podcast. Before you do that, I do want to say that I respect what you do with your podcast. I think it's not just for entertainment purposes. Really, it's educational podcast, and for that, it's very important. Even though agriculture may not be my forte, I can certainly appreciate it and what you do and what you're trying to teach people and educate people on. And I've definitely listened to a few episodes. My younger brother Trevor, he appeared on the Home Alone episode. He started listening to your podcast, I guess. I was just like, "What are you listening to?" He's like, Talk Ag to Me." I'm like, "Really? Okay, I guess."
Good,
It's
it's
just not
working.
something I didn't expect him to start listening to, but that's how good your podcast is. Really, I mean, you have different people on from different walks of life, some that have no agriculture background, and they're still fantastic episodes. So, go ahead and tell people about your podcast. Where can you find it?
You can find it pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. I mean, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I mean, if you search it, you're probably going to find it. I guarantee it. And if not, let me know and I'll get it there. That's actually happened. I told one guy to go find it, and he's like, I don't see it on Overcast. I literally 5 minutes later, I had it on Overcast.
Yeah,
So I'm very dedicated to getting my word out there.
yeah,
But yeah, so it's, I definitely appreciate those kind of words. It means a lot to me whenever somebody comes back to me and says, hey, your podcast is really, really taken off. People love listening to it. I've listened to a few episodes. My family's listened to it. Like that kind of stuff is really, really, it's just great to hear because for so long I've been working on this project, trying to get the word out there about agriculture, trying to get people talking about it, especially those who don't know about it or who don't really have an interest in it, because those are the ones that need to know about it most. And not because I need people to be super on board with agriculture and supporting everything that the agriculture does, but because we all need to eat. And if we're voting on things, if we're making purchasing decisions, if we're making our decisions on who we trust based off of things in social media instead of what's actually going on, it's going to cause a lot more issues than it's going to solve. And so I'm trying to kind of mitigate that as much as possible. So like you mentioned, you may not have as much of an interest in agriculture. That's perfectly fine. And you said that you respect what I do and you respect agriculture, and that's all I could ask of you.
right.
And I'm not asking anybody to take my side on anything either. I just provide information. I say, hey, Go do your own research, prove me wrong. And if they can't, then I say, all right, then trust me. And if you don't want to trust me, then that's all I can do. But to give my elevator pitch of my podcast, it's a podcast dedicated to agricultural literacy. As we've talked about before, I bring on people who don't know anything about agriculture, and we talk about just random stuff, and it's all based around farming and technology and science and legislature and all those super fun, totally not boring topics. But we try to spice it up a little bit by bringing in things like video games and movies and TV shows. And I had a guy on from the Table Talks podcast, fantastic podcast. I recommend it. And I listened to one of his episodes and heard that he wanted to be a baseball announcer. So I use a bunch of baseball analogies because I love baseball. And we had an entire conversation about baseball and how it relates to agriculture. In no way does it relate to agriculture, but we still found ways to make it work. And so that's kind of the fun part about it is, we can find ways to fit this really, really weird topic into a lot of different ways that make it more enjoyable to listen to. Like we mentioned earlier, I was on the Geekology podcast. We talked about agriculture and how it shows up in video games and movies. And we even mentioned the Martian episode that you guys were on. And like I mentioned, people love that episode. Every time I have somebody on, they're like, "Oh yeah, I listened to the Martian episode. It was really good." And I'm like, "Yeah, it was. It was a lot of fun." And so I just enjoy having people on there to talk about what I'm passionate about and also what they're passionate about. And so anyone who wants to come on the show, you're more than welcome to. Anyone I don't require any level of knowledge on agriculture. You could have negative opinions on agriculture. I still want you on the show because I think the conversation is the most important part. But, have fun. If you have any questions, let me know. You can contact me on any of my social medias. It's Talk Ag to Me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. And it's Brendan Black on all of those same sites. So if you want to have a conversation, you want to be on an episode, you have ideas for episodes, you have somebody else who wants to be an episode, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always open for new conversations and new friends. So thanks a lot, Brayden, for having me on and for letting me give my little elevator pitch.
Yeah, no, of course. I think it's important. I think that people should listen. I advocate you to listen to Talk Ag to Me because it really is a great podcast, and I enjoy it. Brendan's he's a halfway decent, smart guy, somewhat.
I try.
And I enjoyed having him on to take Logan's place. Obviously, I would have had you on even if Logan did make it. So thanks for coming. And I do want to end with this. As far as when it comes to agriculture, I was listening to your episode on Geekology 101, where you showed up. Their episode just came out, where you talk about agriculture in sci-fi, right, in video games and movies. And it reminded me of something from The Karate Kid, where Mr. Miyagi, he says something along the lines of, karate is in everything, right? And to me, that's what agriculture, believe it or not, in a lot of the things you do, you don't even realize it. Agriculture is one of the fundamental truths of life. It's everywhere. It's everything.
He gets it.
Exactly. It took me one episode to figure it out. But
it's working.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It really is, and people take it for granted sometimes. But it's there. You need you can't survive without agriculture.
Ain't that the truth?
So thank you, Brendan. I'm going to go ahead and sign off in case I don't see you or whatever time you're listening. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.